Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webcast, Inside Continuous Monitoring, Insider Threat, and Beyond, Session 2. Our session is sponsored by DLT Solutions, ForeScout, and Symantec. I'm Steve LeSueur, a contributing editor for Custom Media with the 1105 Public Sector Media Group, publisher of FCW, GCN, Washington Technology, and Defense Systems magazines, and I will be your moderator today. Today's webcast is the second of a three-part series on continuous monitoring and proactive cybersecurity that has been put together by our sponsors. Our first webcast on real-time network visibility is available for viewing on our website. And at the end of our program, I'll provide you with more information about the date and time of our next webcast on continuous monitoring. Now, today's program will focus on automated remediation, but before we get started, let's go over a few housekeeping items. First, today's webcast will be approximately an hour long. Near the end of the hour, our speakers will host a question and answer discussion. If at any time during the presentation you would like to submit a question, just look for the Q&A box, type in your question, and hit the submit button. And please ask as many questions as you like. Even if we don't have time to get to all of your questions during our program, we will respond via email to unanswered questions after our time expires. If you have any technical difficulties during the program, click on the question mark icon located below the slide window. And here I'll also add that you can often solve technical problems simply by hitting the F5 function to refresh your console. And in addition, you can enlarge the slides by clicking the green button in the slides window. And then finally, after this session is completed, we will be emailing you a link to the archived version of this webcast so you can view the presentation again if you like, or share it with an interested colleague. And that brings us to today's webcast on automated remediation, automating management of cyber threats. Now, an essential component of robust cybersecurity is the ability to continuously scan for vulnerabilities across your agencies and also proactively apply patches, updates, and other fixes. However, when you respond with manual actions, this places an enormous burden on IT resources and also slows your response times. So in today's program, we're going to look at how agencies can implement an integrated solution from Symantec and ForeScout to automate their vulnerability management and remediation processes. And today's speakers are Tom Blauvelt, who is a security architect with Symantec, and where Tom at Symantec provides technical leadership to the continuous monitoring strategic program. And speaking with Tom is Sean Tellis, and Sean is the ForeScout Federal Solutions Architect supporting federal programs or federal partners, federal programs, and systems integrators. And Tom and Sean have welcome back. Well, we really look forward to another interesting program from both of you. And then Sean, I believe you're going to get us started today, so I'll turn the time over to you.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you very much, sir. So, as Steve mentioned, this will be our second webcast in the three series, part two of the three series, and we're going to be discussing how we can automate common security and compliance remediation processes. We'll walk you through a three-phase solution that we're going to project as part of the UCSS, or the Unified Cybersecurity Solution, which Symantec and ForeScout bring together. And, as Steve said, Tom and I will be presenting this. Some key topics to talk about. We're going to briefly talk about the growing threat that many organizations face and kind of set the tone. We'll then discuss why does it make sense to automate cyber hygiene and cyber compliance. From there, we can get the UCSS. We'll review the UCSS reference architecture. And then we'll break into both the Symantec and ForeScout solution summaries. We'll then review some high-level use cases and some potential use cases to kind of illustrate how these might work in a production environment. We'll speak to our value proposition summary. And then, as Steve said, we'll give you a brief intro on what to expect for the third and final webinar. So, the growing threat. So this is a very busy slide, team. I'm not going to read every bullet here, but what we're seeing is a growing trend in a very sharp increase in the number of compromises and how systems are being affected. business operations is being impacted. And really what a lot of that will fix this are just simple hygiene and best practices around compliance, which are already in place and we're already all understanding. The challenge, though, is the size of the work that needs to be done and the skill level of many of our agencies and organizations have to address this. And so that's why automation makes a lot of sense, because what it allows us to do is expand our operational capacity. And what I mean by that is we can take the power of that Tier 3 and Tier 4 administrator and leverage that into an automation workflow, and then having lower tier execute it, such as a Tier 2 or even a Tier 1 operator. And we'll dovetail and explain to that. But referencing specifically the third bullet, 36% of government agencies report that they have a skills gap to address today's challenges. That's very telling. That absolutely says is the problems here, the scope is very large, and unfortunately we don't have the talent, and in many cases can't afford the talent to take care of that. And what that means is many government agencies also still rely on non-standard processes to perform common support tasks. And so when we talk about automation, we're going to hit on standardized process. And behind that, what that means is if you have an operations staff that does the same task 5 different ways, it's very difficult to automate that. So what you want to do is standardize to a best possible manual practice and then work that into an automation workflow. And then from there, if and when the tool does fail, this automation technology fails, you have a best practice to fall back on. What that brings us is trained people along with standardized processes alone basically cannot close the gaps without intelligent policy-based automation. So there are 2 real key programs in the government now that are working to improve cyber hygiene and compliance automation. The first is the Continual Diagnostics and Mitigation Program, or CDM. And really what that is a 3-phase effort over the next several years to bring about with federal, state, and local agencies to identify what's on my network, how do I control what's on my network, how do I maintain a consistent security baseline on that network, and how do I ensure that as I bring new things on the network, I mitigate my risk up front. The other big one to really speak of is the United States Marine Corps Comply to Connect. And that's actually a very similar one, except for the difference of before they're going to allow you on their network, you have to meet a certain criteria of a patch level, a user, a machine type, logging on the right network, so on and so forth. These are both pivotal shifts in how they actually allow systems on their production network. And so with that, Tom, I was wondering, did you have anything to add on to that?
Yeah, thank you, Sean, and thank you everyone for attending today. It's really all about speed and time. The CDM program has implemented requirements for identifying assets on your network, inventorying those assets, inventorying configuration and vulnerability defects, within every 72 hours. And the closer to real time you can get, the better. So this is really a testament to the realization that the threats are moving much faster than the average agency and organization is moving. And in order to really, get ahead of these threats, we have to automate. It's really a necessary thing. In large environments, though, that becomes very complex and a very difficult thing to do. And so what we have to do is we have to start building solutions kind of from the ground up that take advantage of how different organizations are laid out and be flexible enough to cover a wide variety of environments. And so that's what we've worked on together here with ForeScout to help provide some of this. And in the previous webinar, we talked about this idea that assets on the network have to be identified, because if you don't know about it, you can't protect them. You can't fix the defects. So knowing is half the battle. DHS has been repeating this over and over, that basic and intermediate controls can help to thwart 80% of the security issues that are occurring in agencies. These basic and intermediate controls largely have to do with cyber hygiene. Other requirements, come out, such as the critical security controls and various NIST requirements, also attest to this fact that time is of the essence. So an overview of this idea of unified cybersecurity solution. We've put this together essentially to take technologies that complement one another in both, those basic processes, those basic hygiene processes, as well as increasing the capabilities to detect, prevent, and respond to events that are occurring in the network. We have laid out some use cases towards the end of the presentation where we're going to demonstrate how we do that. So a comprehensive view into these assets, we talked about, this, what is that view? I mean, that's going to require us to know things about what devices are popping on my network. Virtual devices make that even more challenging, as they tend to get provisioned very quickly and even deprovisioned very quickly, so they can pop on and pop off the network very quickly. We need to know about software, configuration items, vulnerabilities, sensitive data, even where is the sensitive data, the inventory of that on our network, things like the repositories, whether that be structured and unstructured data, and even users. Where are our high-risk users, and what locations are they on, what servers and assets are they controlling and logging into? If we take a good look at implementing these basic and intermediate controls, there's benefits. The projects can be complex, and there's some initial upfront efforts and costs that we need to put in place. But we're going to drive costs down through the automation, and also through reducing our security resources that are out chasing events and issues. Sometimes those events are false positives that need to be validated. And if we have a better system in place, we can actually get to more of the needle in a haystack to identify where those events are and respond much quicker. So there's a cost imperative of doing this. We can improve service uptime and make our operations more effective. For Sean's comment earlier, it's very important to understand that a huge limitation we have of resource. Not only the amount of staff that we need to do a lot of these tasks, but also the skill sets out there are rare and oftentimes very expensive to procure and keep. And so if we can automate some of these tasks, we can reduce some of the burdens that come with that in terms of costs. But uptime is also an interesting topic. Traditionally, we've thought about uptime being the job of disaster recovery, business continuity, and things of that nature. Security must be in the uptime equation, because when a security event occurs, as many of you out there may very well have experienced firsthand, it can have dramatic impacts to your uptime. If data is not reliable, it could have impacts. If data is removed or deleted, it can have impacts to uptime. If staff has to respond to incidents as opposed to moving forward for customer issues and things like that, it can have impacts to uptime and to the ability to be efficient and effective. So we have to now look at security as part of that equation. We talked about cyber hygiene and how important that is, and really what it all boils down to is risk mitigation. We want to be able to understand what is the risk in our environment, how much risk does it represent, where should it go in our priority list, and how should we best respond to those threats. And not only respond, but can we shut them down so they don't occur again. Some common examples. Could you ask yourself the question, could you know very quickly when a rogue asset pops up on your network? Do you know when an asset maybe changes jurisdictions? Do you know what software is installed on your asset? Do you know if removable drives are being used? And if so, do you know if that removable drive has sensitive data on it? Those are some of the questions we really have to ask ourselves to best understand, are we doing this correctly? From a patch management perspective, there needs to be good thought put into a process and some policies. Patches represent mitigations, but they also can represent a threat to that uptime requirement. So we have to balance that, and we have to make sure that we can prioritize patches that represent immediate relief from emerging threats. And oftentimes that requires intelligence that we have to get outside of our organization and integrate that into the patch management process. Same way with vulnerability management. We need to have good tools. Vulnerability management needs to be part of that risk equation where we prioritize and remediate vulnerabilities. A lot of them are patches, some of them are configuration items that need to change, or software that need to be removed, that sort of thing. Application and software whitelisting attempts to get it in front of software and apps that can represent risk to our organization, either by preventing those from being installed or by identifying when they are installed and or executed so that we can respond to that. Configuration management and compliance. When we configure a box, we want to make sure that it's configured to best practices and as well as tuned for our organizational needs. And that can require a good amount of thought. You're going to need some tools to do that. Compliance monitoring is an important piece as well, because a lot of the work that you do from an operational perspective has to attest to the fact that you're compliant with your regulations and frameworks that you're choosing to use to implement sound security. Those are very difficult or impossible things to do on a spreadsheet. Unless you're a very small organization, you're going to need to automate those functions. System staging and hardening, likewise, should be given thought. System staging from the perspective of you might have a gold image, and very quickly that gold image is no longer the most secure image. So you need to understand how to update in the interim before your next gold release, and to make sure that if you have really high priority changes that occur, is there a process that impact that image process, maybe speed it up so that new machines going into the network have been hardened against critical threats. So here we have a reference architecture that we've put together, and it really starts kind of towards the bottom here, where our standards are at. Standards dictate to us and are chosen by us to determine how we want to craft our security programs and services that we're putting together. Some of these are mandated to us, some of them are choices. Oftentimes organizations have both. They might be following multiple standards, and that can get complex as well. Because there is a lot of overlap in some of these standards where you might be implementing a single control that might satiate the requirements of multiple standards. So managing that process is tricky. We need some tools to help us with that. We certainly have those available for you. The next part is the controls, the tools, and those various pieces in place that help to support the standards that you have chosen to put into place. They can be at various control points within the organization. Here we have endpoint, patch management, compliance management, process automation. We should not bypass process automation too quickly, because a lot of security is process. A lot of security is not measured by a technical control, but rather by the process of how that technical control is managed, or how our people are implementing the actual control into the process. So we need to be able to measure what's important to us. If it's important, we measure it. And as the old adage says, so we need to make sure that we've identified what our key controls are and that we're staying on top of it. This is really at the heart of continuous monitoring and eventually ongoing authorization, which will help us to have a more real-time view into controls and whether or not they're meeting those requirements for system authorization. Lastly, good reporting, dashboards, metrics are necessary to support the overall program. There's a variety of layers that presentation occurs. So you might have a local sub-agency dashboard that drives operations and decisions at that point. You might have an overarching agency metric that you need to support. And obviously we all know about supporting our metrics that go to Congress for cyberscope and things of that nature. So it's very important that we have a multi-layered presentation model in place to support that. So I want to talk real briefly. We went over this in the last webinar, some of the Symantec products that kind of made up the core of that presentation. We have our endpoint protection. This is a host-based anti-malware, antivirus, anti-bad stuff tool that we have. It's top notch in the industry, and one of the most highly rated in terms of effectiveness in this category. There's a layered defense methodology here, and it includes not only signature but behavioral, reputational capabilities. We can control execution of software. We can control removal of devices and things of that nature. So we extend into the browser protection. We have cloud capabilities. This tool is really top-notch, and is saving a lot of pain for our customers. We also have IPMS. This is a CMDB in part. It has various modules to it that allow you to do a whole ton of things. One of the most important things is cyber hygiene. Assets, hardware, software inventory. We can deploy that gold image, that software package, patches, tell you where your patches are at, push those patches out, things of that nature. We also have things like remote management, lifecycle management of the assets, things of that nature. It's a very powerful leading tool in the industry. Lastly, we talked about Control Compliance Suite. There's a variety of products in here, and this helps you with implementing your benchmarks, finding the defects, scanning your environment for discovery. We have SCAT capabilities there. We also have the ability to tie the evidence of the controls in your environment to the frameworks that we talked about and show you where your overlaps are at, show you what you're meeting and what you're missing, help you prioritize that by giving you risk scores, et cetera, et cetera. There's also other components to it, such as tools to help you manage your policies and tie those into your organization effectively. Vendor risk management capabilities, so you can now assess the risks of partners, vendors, third parties that are representing risk to your organization. And in this slide, I want to introduce a new tool. It's not new to Symantec, but it's new to the webinar series. It is our Data Center Security Server Advanced tool. In the past, we'd called this tool Critical Systems Protection. We've rebranded that, and it's a tremendous tool. It's an agent-based tool that provides detection and prevention capabilities at the kernel mode of the operating system. It essentially intercepts I/O going across that kernel and applies policies to that based on what we understand to be appropriate and inappropriate behavior across not only the operating system, but the application. It has the ability to really look at a lot of details and help us to make policy. There's a lot of out-of-the-box functionality where you just kind of set it and forget it that's going to help remediate a lot of risk out there. And then there's also a granular component that allows you to tune this agent to implement specific use cases or very specific things that you want to do. There's a system lockdown capability, so you can prevent change from occurring into the system. It's very important. So once you've configured your system to meet your standards or your benchmark, you want to keep it that way. Oftentimes, no administrator or somebody can come in and make a change, and it may be malicious or it may just be benign, but it could introduce risk to the organization. We can help stop those changes from occurring and keep that box locked down the way it's supposed to be. There's a whitelisting capability there. We can also blacklist as well. There's privilege de-escalation. This is one of the more powerful features. Because we essentially run at that kernel mode layer and can intercept I/O and restrict it and allow it, we can help to, we can essentially put controls, access controls, and other controls around your admins on Windows and your root users in Unix. Now, this is extremely powerful because oftentimes these super users represent risk that is largely you're not able to mitigate. So, for example, you might want an administrator to troubleshoot a server, but that server contains a sensitive file, maybe payroll for everyone or something like that, and you want to lock them out of that and only give that to the HR team. We can create those rules apart from the operating system access control list and essentially stop admins and roots from accessing the files. We can also prevent network connections and keep them from executing certain programs or services. So if you don't want an administrator FTPing sensitive information off a particular box, but you want to force them to use a more secure protocol or something like that, or just want to block file transfer altogether for those individuals, we can do that very, very effectively. And a lot of customers are finding a need for this particular capability in a lot of different areas of their business. With the ability to watch I/O, we have trained the sensor to essentially understand behavior of applications and operating systems. This is a very effective way at mitigating zero-day threats. And we can essentially say, hey, you know what, that Internet Explorer program should not be attempting to modify a DLL in the Windows 32 subdirectory. That is inappropriate behavior. Block that from occurring. And we have had very good success blocking 0 days with this. There's a variety of other capabilities here that can be very powerful. The single agent, single console across a tremendous swath of operating systems, including legacy. So, for example, if you have Windows XP, you know that Microsoft is not putting out patches for that anymore. But you might be stuck between a rock and a hard place because the application runs on that. This product would be a good tool to put onto that box to help protect it from emerging threats against that operating. But really gain an appreciation of the tool, and I call it kind of the Swiss Army knife of host-based security because of its versatility. You have to understand really all the attack vectors or many of the attack vectors that are targeted on your hosts. For Windows, there's registry, there's config files, there's portable devices, there's applications, there's memory attacks, there's attacks against the operating system itself. And Server Advanced has capabilities in each of those areas to reduce the impacts and thwart the threats that are coming in. So it does have active prevention. So, for example, we can remediate an attack against memory in many operating systems. We can block attacks from modifying system files and things of that nature, unless it's coming from an authorized source, such as your file, your software distribution tool. We can customize a profile to fit your specific application, so you can protect your homegrown or your custom app. So it has tremendous capability across your enterprise to help with it. We can also watch a lot of things and provide information for analytics. We don't necessarily have to block. We can watch all of these. We can watch what processes an admin is running. We can even look at the command lines that they're running and send that to things like SIMs and things of that nature for further analysis. It's an excellent incident response tool as well as a prevention and protection. The other thing is, we're seeing a lot of non-traditional devices emerge that need security. We have SCADA systems, there's medical devices, kiosks, point-of-sale systems, just all these things and all the Internet of Things driving additional devices into our lives that we have to deal with one way or another. Many of these devices run embedded code, Windows embedded code, or they have a Linux kernel and things of that nature. Because of our broad platform coverage with this tool, we have a good fit with a lot of these devices where we can put our tool on there and enforce these policies. We're very lean. We use very little memory, very little hard drive space, so we don't impact even the most performance-laden machines. And we can even run, in certain cases, headless. So you set your policy, and maybe you don't have connection back to the management server. We log locally and at least enforce a policy on those boxes as they sit out there in wherever they're at. Kind of a testament to the power of this device. We've gone to Black Hat several times now, and we've set up scenarios there where we've put in a network in place, kind of a mini data center, if you will. We've, on purpose, put in vulnerable applications. We've left certain controls turned off so that attackers would have to bang their heads against Server Advanced and the capabilities that it brings to bear. We saw all kinds of attacks, zero-day attacks, Metasploit attacks, Tiger teams have come in and attack this thing. For 3 straight years, and we put flags in there. If you can capture the flag, we'll give you a substantial amount of money. So it's actually, folks have tried very, very hard to get in, and for 3 years running now, we've protected that mini data center without compromise. That's a tremendous feather in the cap for this product. We also had some testing against Stuxnet and found that out of the box, we protect it against the 4 zero-day threats that Stuxnet implements. So the nice thing about this tool is, because it's behavioral based, we don't require signature updates for this like a traditional malware tool. We simply understand behaviors, and signatures change, but by and large, behaviors that are malicious remain the same. And that makes it a very effective tool to get people to effect. And with that, I will hand it off to you, Sean.
Thanks, Tom. So to kind of help the audience think about how ForeScout can help with compliance, I did something a little different, and I pulled out some data that we had done several surveys with commercial and federal organizations, and we just simply asked them, what are your key challenges or gaps that you have with managing compliance? And the next two slides have a lot of text. I'm not going to read every word, but I will summarize some of the high points of each of those gaps. And the first gap, which we covered greatly in the first webinar, were difficulties that persist in detecting every device as it connects to a network, both classified and unclassified. And really what Counteract brings is the delivery of a real-time agentless, event-based, event-driven discovery of devices as they connect to the network. We also do leverage point-in-time scans from tools like Nmap that's embedded in our solution, but as we're integrated and meshed into the network environment, as that switch detects the connection, we're able to detect that something has connection and then begin to profile that device and what it is, which takes us to our second gap, which really there's difficulties in automating the classification of not just standard but non-standard IP-enabled devices, such as IP phones, handheld devices, medical equipment, anything that many agencies use on their environment day to day that don't necessarily fit into that traditional mold of a server or a workstation. And what we do is we deliver a mechanism to classify these non-standard devices automatically. In fact, for the most part, most of them are automatically classified through our own internal means through passive and active fingerprinting. We also, though, not everything gets classified automatically, and so we are able to also have a manual method for those cats and dogs that are left as well, so that at the end of the day, everything is classified and we know exactly what's on our network. As opposed to doing it manually, much of that manual process is taken out through Counteract. The third gap is identifying non-manageable devices. So that rogue device or that quick test server that someone set up on the network to do some, because they don't have a proper lab, that poses a lot of problems for many organizations. And so what we do there is we're able to classify those automatically based on, do they belong to Active Directory? Are they being managed and up to date by a patch management system such as ITMS? And if they don't have, if they're not managed, we can then send a trigger event to that management system to take control of that system and manage it, or open a ticket so that IT operations can take corrective action as they need to. The fourth gap is removing devices from a network. So this device is something I don't want on my network. It's not compliant. It could potentially be rogue. And so what we're able to do is, or it's supposed to be managed, but it's in such a poor state right now, it's posing a great risk to my IT operations. And so what we're able to do then is, that's really where your classic NAC and compliance automation that we're able to help with by blocking the port, moving it to a provisioning network, and then restoring it back to a known good state if it's supposed to be managed, or quarantining it if it is potentially a rogue device, and leaving it there until operations has the ability to do what they need to do. And finally, difficulties really do persist ensuring that all the software components that are required are on there. And we have the ability to not only ensure that they're required, but that they're up to date, they're at the right patch level. And again, same with a non-managed device. If we do see a discrepancy, we're able to send that trigger event to a system like ITMS that can then bring it up to a patch feed. Or if it's a brand new zero-day malware component, we can scan the environment and identify those components across your system and take corrective action as well. Let's kind of change gears and let's talk about 3 levels of maturity when we talk really about any standardized process management. And to make it simple, we really broke it down, and Tom and I broke it into three levels with 3 tiers. And the first one, many organizations are at any one of these 3 tiers. So hopefully this touches across everyone in the audience. The first one is level 1, and that's where, as I spoke earlier, that ad hoc process. It's not really documented, or if it is documented, it's not followed. So you may have 5 different ways of doing that same task. And unfortunately, that drives inefficiency in your operations. It brings your cost up, and it adds risk. During that level 1, though, many organizations realize this, and they move to a process standardization program. And that's where they come together and they develop the best way to do something, whether it's patch a system, harden the device, stage a device, open a ticket. Once you develop that way, then a lot of organizations will implement something like a Kaizen, where you can improve it over time through a controlled process, bottom up. People that do the tasks might find a better way. Well, rather than going off more of a cowboy route, they would, and doing it and then not sharing it, they're encouraged to share that with their organization so that the organization agrees that that is the best way to do it, and then everyone does it that way. And what this does is it brings about just a huge amount of efficiency in your operations. Event management is another one that is a level of maturity for level 1. It really needs to be in place. What we mean by that is that we know what's on our network. Our events are coming into our systems. We're able to visualize them in real time at the operations desk so that we can take action. But also we're able to correlate them and aggregate them over a period of time, monthly, quarterly, annually, so that our leaders can take the appropriate action, the strategic action, to pivot and shift operations as they need to. Once you kind of move into that first level, most organizations are ready to move into the second level or second tier. And that's where we take those repeatable tasks, that 80-20 rule. Password resets is a big one that many organizations, when you look at help desk metrics, password resets are just a huge burden. A lot of help desks that don't have automated password reset or self-help password resets are spending tens of thousands or even millions of dollars in labor, having people at a service desk take the call, change the password, and bring that back online. Not to mention the lost work that individual has to deal with by not being able to log into their application or even onto their server or desktop because they don't know their password. And so the idea here is to take that very common, very repeatable task, patch deployment, so on and so forth. But there's we're really just automating tasks. And I'll touch on the difference between automating tasks versus automating a process. Once you have a repeatable task automation underway and it's mature, then it makes sense to move into a third level, and that's where you're taking more of a complex process automation approach, where it still may be human-driven, but as I was speaking to earlier, you're automating process now. And so kind of if you think about object-oriented programming, where you take small scriptlets or small pieces of code and you unify them to do something larger, that's essentially what we're talking about here. So, automating a task could be resetting a password, as I said before. Automating a process, however, could be the user needs to reset their password, they go onto the self-help system, they reset their password, a metric is then generated so that the help desk and operations can still track it, whether it's a ticket or a report. That then is both opened and closed, all with very little or no human intervention at all. And you can go more and more into a continual improvement process as the organization gets more comfortable with it, as their culture changes, and they're more accepting, and they're more readily able to introduce process automation without risk. Then you'll see that kind of expand and move from there. This next slide really visualizes that. The 3 levels of compliance maturity. and kind of how you move up the scale. So the question, and we don't need any answers obviously on this call, but ask yourselves, where is your organization in relation to evolving from more of a chaotic state, which would be on the lower left-hand corner where it's colored red, up into a continual improvement up into the right, which is really the nirvana and what we're all looking to do. And it moves from, ad hoc manual process management, which is really that non-standard manual process, standardizing your manual processes to eliminate the waste in your manual processes and get that single best way of doing it. Monitoring and reporting to improve our situational awareness. We know what we're doing, what's going on, allows us to pinpoint problems faster and correct them faster. As we then move up the chain, we hit the automation technologies that we bring in, your ITMSs of the world, your counteracts of the world, that can take those simple, repeatable tasks and automate them. You may still have a person execute the automation task, but again, what we're talking about, as I said earlier, taking the goodness or the intelligence or the experience of that Tier 3 admin and allowing a Tier 2 admin to execute that automated action on behalf of the Tier 3 admin. And what this does is huge cost savings, because now our Tier 3 admins, they're not doing the day-to-day mundane work. They're allowed to be freed up, be more proactive, more creative, and bring better value to the organization. As we move into the third level, that's where you're looking at your orchestration, your monitoring, and your automation. And that's really where your process automation kind of begins, where you might have a security event manager get a certain type of threat response in there that says this device is rogue or this device is going haywire, something needs to happen, and then it can send a trigger event to a counteract to quarantine it, or this user has logged in to their system 50 times in the last 3 days and they're failing, and so maybe we need to reset their password or work with them. And what we're doing now is unifying technologies so that they work as a cohesive unit, delivering even more value. And then really unifying the automation technologies is the next step, and that's where we'll be talking about today, where we have the UCSS really working as a single solution, not a suite of tools, not two vendors, but a single solution for your agencies and your organizations to really automate process flows, as I referenced to before. Once that happens, you're really then into a continual improvement as you identify, with any automation program, you start with the low-risk, low-lying fruit that's done a lot of times. It's well-known, well-documented, but as you move out of that, you will find more opportunities to automate more complex processes, if that makes sense. Now, to be clear, there is a law of diminishing returns on this. There is a threshold, and it's different for every organization. It's based on culture, it's based on their budget, it's based on their staff, but basically there does become a point in time where things are just too unique and too complex, and automation, you may automate some of the tasks of it to make it go better, but the entire, or you may automate some processes, but the entire process probably doesn't make sense because it's going to be different every single time. So let's go ahead and touch on the Symantec and ForeScout that UCSS value proposition. What we're saying is this three-phase approach allows customers to advance organically through the three tiers. It allows them to go at their pace, manage their own risk, and move at the constraints and requirements that they have. It's very unique for each customer. We know that every customer is unique and and needs to be handled and supported differently, and that's the key thing in what we're proposing here. Operational tier capacity is expanded through automation. It's initially expanded through process standardization. That next tier is then having those keystrokes basically automated by a tool like the Symantec or like the counteract can provide. What this brings is not only service level improvement because our outages are reduced, our service is restored faster, it brings about that cost savings I was speaking to, because again, you're not paying that Tier 3 admin to reset a password or to patch a system. You're now having that Tier 2 admin, which is generally more affordable and more cost-effective way of doing that. And this is, again, through task and process automation. what this does is it frees up, as I was saying on the previous slides, it frees up your hierarchy organization to be more proactive, to focus on engineering new solutions, new capacities, and having you focus on emerging threats, having you track zero-day, having you be more proactive against things like that. So again, you can be continually improving your environment and continually driving security and business continuity. And finally, as we had said, this is an incremental, low-risk approach. As we understand, every agency is different. To improving security operations, there are both efficiency, how it's done, and the cost and the effectiveness, which would be the actual success of that being done. So with that, we're going to talk about essentially 4 use cases. I know we have 5 up there, and I'll explain in a second what Tom and I mean by that. But the first use case is essentially very simple, automating and hardening and remediation of the system and how the UCSS solution can cover that. The second one is where we're going to partner with a third-party scanner and take action against a known vulnerability and remediate it in an automated way. 2A, which is really very similar to use case 2, is how we would handle it with a zero-day. And both Tom and I will be speaking to that to some degree. And then the third use case is how we'll provision we'll have UCSS provision a hardened system. And then the fourth use case really touches in behavioral anomalies, which kind of speaks to what we're talking about in a more advanced level, but also touches to a lot of what we're going to be talking about in the third webinar as well. So with the first use case here, what we have is Control Compliance Suite scans hosts and identifies any issues. As it identifies issues in how the compliance posture of these systems are, whether it's a registry setting, a patch level, the devices in the wrong network, it will trigger on that and then send interesting events or trigger events to ITMS and or to ForeScout. From there, we can take action automatically. We can ingest that information from CCS and then invoke scripts, invoke automation actions against servers, workstations, and your more network and non-traditional devices to ensure that they're affected and fixed in immediate fashion. The next use case is really we're going to automate basically how we would handle a known vulnerability through the scanning and UCSS remediation. So a third-party scanner, and we've listed just a few examples up top there, would initiate its security scan. It would identify potentially several or many or one vulnerable system, and from there the action begins to happen. The trigger event is then moved down into ForeScout, which jumps right into action and is able to quarantine the device. It is now protected, that risk is mitigated. Those infected systems cannot leapfrog onto other systems or other networks in your agency because they have been, in this use case, moved to a provisioning network. We're now we then send a trigger event to ITMS, which can then do its magic, which would be to remediate the vulnerability, either through changing the configuration setting, if that's what was discovered, or updating the patch levels of the device. Once we have confirmation that those systems are back to a known good state, ForeScout can then release them back into production, and this is both servers and workstations. We can release them back into production in the normal operational state. So with use case 2A, a very similar use case, only with this one, we're not speaking with ITMS, we're speaking with data center security. And again, we will initiate our vulnerability scan. This time, though, a zero-day. The scanner has identified a zero-day vulnerability that has been identified. It sends the same trigger event over to ForeScout. We'll perform the same quarantining device, again, to regulate and to control that device. Additionally, we can scan your environment, which is not shown in this use case, but we can scan your environment with other potential zero-day and identify those as well as a backup to what the vulnerability scanner may have missed, will then pass our trigger event onto data center security, which then essentially puts their protective policy-based control around that device. So even though there's no known fix, DCS has the ability to put a sandbox policy-based control around that appliance, around that server, to make sure that that code is executed or that internet connection, to a botnet is not made. Tom, is there anything that you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, Sean, thank you. I think this is a really important use case to focus on. In 2014, we saw more 0 days out than any time in history. So the number of 0 days that were found, that's been increasing. And the ability for the bad guy to move an exploit into production far exceeds the time where patches are actually coming out from the vendor, let alone the time that it takes to turn that patch around into the environment. So because of these lag times between when the attack is occurring and when the mitigation goes in place, we have to think about a layered defense. And this is where Data Center Security Server Advanced can really come in and help provide a tremendous layer for you for the reasons that I talked about earlier, to help buy time, essentially, until a patch actually comes out and you can remediate it that way. Okay, I want to take the next use case here. Thanks, Sean. We're going to talk a little bit here about whitelisting and how that works. In this particular case, we have a harmful app that gets installed. And, for example, the Server Advanced can actually detect when applications are installed. We can actually prevent it too, but you might have more of a detective mechanism that you want in place. There's a lot of flexibility there. So in this particular use case, we'll identify that and signal ForeScout that, hey, this device has fallen out of an acceptable range of configuration. ForeScout can then reach out and essentially quarantine that device, maybe from putting it on a management network so that it can reach out to whatever management servers are necessary to remediate this, such as an IPMS device. Once that system's clean, obviously we need it back in production. So ForeScout will release it back into production now that it has a clean bill of health. And the last use case here is a very interesting one. This is where we're talking about the behavioral analysis. So in this particular case, on the top left, we have a server application attempting an illegal action. Let's say an administrator is attempting to use FTP on that device, and that's against policy. On the bottom left, we have a print server, and it's attempting to make an illegal connection out to the internet, which is not something we want to see from that device. So these actions are detected both by ForeScout and by Symantec Server Advanced. Policies are in place to restrict access from that print server going out to the internet and for that FTP to actually function. Maybe we kill the FTP, or maybe we restrict the FTP to just internal addresses, whatever the policy dictates in that case. And here's where it's really cool, because we'll take these feeds and put it into a data analytics layer. Now, this is where we can get additional intelligence into what's going on in our environment. Let's say that FTP action was to the attempted FTP action was to the print server, and that print server around the same time is attempting to outbound communicate with maybe a server out of Russia, per se. By itself, those are pretty interesting events, but combined, that analytics gives you a tremendous advantage, and that's what that's the signals that we can actually take out of these, combine them into a data analytics layer to provide additional insight to what's going on in your organization, and increase the threat or risk around that particular event. Once these boxes are receive a clean bill of health, maybe in this particular case, the incident response team was summoned and responded to an APT or something along those lines, advanced persistent threat. The boxes get a clean bill of health, and then obviously they have restored normal operations. Okay, so let me just summarize, what we've talked about. First of all, I want to say, Sean and I are very passionate about your mission. We've been in security a long time, and we see very closely the threats that you are dealing with, the problems that you're facing, and we understand that we need to help you become better at what you do. We need to help you become quicker at these processes, this hygiene. We need to give you tools that you can actually implement, put in place that work as a unified solution. And because of that passion for your mission, we've put this together, and we hope that we've shown you the value of some of this. And we hope we've convinced you that you need to take a strong look at what you're doing, ask yourself some tough questions, figure out how you can improve your processes and your operations, so that we can get ahead, attempt to get ahead of some of these threats. The fact of the matter is, the malicious threats out there are operating at a much quicker pace than we are. And we have to make it a priority to get ahead of that or to improve on that. It's an imperative. We're just too far behind in a lot of cases right now, and we've got to do something about it. So we want to help you do that. We're going to help you detect these threats faster, respond to these threats faster, identify your defects in your environment more quickly, as close to real time as we can. We want to help you automate as much as we can. We want to give you back some time to your security analysts so they can make bigger impacts rather than chasing processes around that should be automated in the first place. And we have flexible solutions. We're enterprise solutions. We can flex for your environment and customize a solution that makes sense for you at the pace and maturity level that you're currently at and that you want to arrive at. So with that, I'd like to introduce our next webinar, where we're going to go through more proactive security control through behavioral analysis. We're going to talk about some intelligence capabilities and things of that nature. We encourage you to join us for that as well. And if you can't make it, it will be recorded and available for you as well. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for your time. This is our contact information, so if you would like to reach out to us to discuss this further, we'd be delighted to hear from you. And with that, I'll hand it back to you, Steve.
All right, thank you very much. And we just have a few moments for questions, so let's just get to them right away. And we've got a question here, Sean, for you. The questioner asks, how does your solution differentiate between task automation and process orchestration?
Thank you, Steve. So, as we covered in the presentation, a task automation would be patching a server. A simple task, one thing, it's really doing one thing. Whereas process orchestration, process is what? A series of tasks that are used together in a collective fashion. And so with process automation, we're combining those tasks in an intelligent manner so that the entire process can be automated. That doesn't mean we're necessarily taking a human being out of the loop. Many organizations aren't ready for that, and quite frankly, there's a lot of risk in doing that. But the idea is to automate the process as best we can so that we're bringing costs down, we're having those best practices that we develop through our process standardization implemented every single time, because the tools will just do that. Once that automation task is developed, it's going to do it that way every time. And generally, why you want the human being in the loop is they still need to make that decision of, this use case might be slightly different. Do I need to adjust the automated task, or do I need to do something different altogether?
Okay, and let's sneak in one more question here, Sean. The questioner asks, just as somebody asked a similar question in the first webinar, is this part of UCSS modular? Meaning, can we leverage it, with our legacy investments, or do we have to rip and replace with this solution?
Exactly. Great question. Thank you, Steve. So this is modular. This is very modular. This is not a rip and replace. We very much intend for UCSS to integrate with existing solutions to, likely fill gaps as opposed to replace existing tools that are perfectly fine in what they're doing. With the one exception, and I'll let Steve touch on this a little bit, which would be the DCS, that policy-based sandbox. And that's just from my own personal bias. I don't know of a lot of technologies out there that do policy-based sandbox control of applications to that power and granularity that there are. So if there's another tool out there, obviously, DCS wouldn't, would maybe not be part of that UCSS solution. But in most cases, UCSS or DCS would be new. Tom, did you have anything to add on to that?
Yeah, it's unique. There's a lot of claims out there, right? In terms of this buzzword sandboxing and things like that, and there are some technologies that do it. They don't do it the same way. You really have to get kind of technical to understand what the differences are. But a lot of times, a sandbox is, hey, this application's trusted or it's untrusted. In a lot of cases, that's not necessarily good enough because a trusted application can be coerced or manipulated by a hacker, malware, things like that to do bad things. And so we have to be able to differentiate between good behavior from an application that may be by nature trusted, maybe it's an operating system service, but we have to be able to differentiate between an operating system service doing good things and bad things. We also have to be able to customize to meet the specific needs of the user, and that requires very detailed granularity at times that we provide. Really no one else in the marketplace does that. I don't know of anybody else who makes the black hat claims, and I've been in competitive situations certainly where our tool at the end of the day just rises to the top of the stack. So I'd love, if folks are interested in it, I'd love to be able to, set you up with the right folks to help show you what the tool can do and why it's a market-leading tool.
Well, thank you very much, both Tom and Sean. And I'm sorry, that's all the time we have for questions today, but a great presentation. And again, a special thanks to DLT, ForeScout, and Symantec for sponsoring today's webcast. Now, as I mentioned earlier, if we didn't get to your question, don't worry. We will be emailing answers to unanswered questions we received today. And in addition, we did have some people ask about getting a copy of the presentation slides. And if you would like a PDF copy of the slides, go to the resource list in the lower left-hand corner of your screen and click on Download the Presentation Deck. And then also, as Sean mentioned, we're going to be having our third session of this three-part session, and that's going to be on June 2nd at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and that will be on proactive security through behavioral analysis and control. And if you would like a link to that presentation so you can sign up, or a link to our first presentation that we had, go to your resource list, and you can find links to both of those presentations. And then finally, in the next day or two, we are going to be emailing you a link to an archived version of this webcast so you can view the presentation again if you like. So thank you very much for attending today's webcast. This concludes our presentation.